Hello everyone! If you're a Final Fantasy XI player wondering about the future of this title in the franchise, or someone who has never played FF11 but put it off because it hasn't been released for the current generation, this video might be for you. It was recently announced through an interview with Yoshi P that Creative Studio 3, formerly Creative Business Unit 3, is currently working on 2 unannounced games. I have strong reason to believe that a Final Fantasy XI Remake is one of those games. And in this video, I will be sharing my thoughts on why I think this is the case. This, of course, means that the video is speculative in nature, but I will be supporting my theory with evidence and some logic. In the end, you can decide if you agree if there is any weight to this at all, or perhaps by the time you watch this, it is no longer a question on people's minds. Whichever way it is, I hope you enjoy what I have to say. The first question to address is whether FF11 needs a remake or not, and the simple answer is yes. At the vana'diel project press conference in early 2015, the developers of FF11 acknowledged that it was facing issues because it could only be developed using aging PS2 development kits, which were already obsolete. No other game was using this technology at that point, and it would only be a matter of time before support was discontinued by Sony themselves. If the dev kits they were using would eventually become unserviceable, there would be no way to develop for FF11 at all. Because of this, the dev team was forced to scale down development so as to extend the lifespan of the dev kits, and by extension, the survival of FF11 itself. In that same event, they announced a mobile version of FF11 being developed by Korean game developer Nexon. This was to be a new distinct version of FF11, which Nexon themselves would later refer to as Final Fantasy XI Reboot. This was seen as a way of giving players an alternative to experiencing FF11, knowing that original FF11 would one day have to shut down due to possible unserviceability and technical issues. So Final Fantasy XI did, in fact, have some sort of a remake that had been officially announced. If the mobile remake of the game had been released, we wouldn't be here talking about this. In 2021, the mobile remake was unceremoniously cancelled after having been in development for 5 years, with the reason being cited as the game not meeting both Nexon and Square Enix's expectations. While Nexon never officially released material showing the progress of the developing game, a number of screenshots and leaks showed that development had at the very least proceeded for various game assets like areas and enemies, and it was reported that there was already a working version of the game in 2015. But while the mobile remake had been cancelled, this did not mean that a remake was no longer needed. By this point, the PS2 dev kits were that much older, and the original FF11 dev team had been reduced to a skeletal crew. While FF11 was still putting out new content and nowhere near the maintenance mode it had officially declared itself to be in, it was doing so at a much slower pace. It had become a shadow of its former self. What happens when development of a Final Fantasy game by a third party stops? We've actually seen this happen in recent years. It is quite well known that Final Fantasy VII Remake had initially been co-developed by third-party company CyberConnect 2, before shifting completely in-house so that Square Enix had more control over the product. If the recent rumors are to be believed, the same had also happened with the rumored FF9 Remake. We have no idea how the agreements between Square Enix and Nexon on FF11 were drafted, but the most sensible expectation when the agreement was terminated is that assets that were developed for Square Enix's intellectual property would be given back to them, and they would be able to do what they want with it. With the amount of assets that were already developed for the mobile remake in the 5 years prior to its cancellation, it would be a complete waste if they were not used ever again. Now that Square Enix had ownership and control over these assets once more, they would be able to use them to develop a product that suited their vision of the game and the brand image of a mainline Final Fantasy game. If work on an FF11 remake were being developed in-house, no division within Square Enix would be more well-suited to do it than Creative Studio 3. After all, Creative Studio 3 is the very division that handles FF11 itself, and was also overseeing the mobile remake with Nexon. They also have expertise handling other online games, as well as the unique experience of having rebuilt an MMORPG in the form of Final Fantasy XIV. There would already be staff on the team that would have had experience working on original FF11 or are familiar with the project. Even Yoshi P himself has stated on record that he understood the workings of FF11 as well as the mobile title when it was still in development. In an interview with Yoshi P for Final Fantasy XI's 20th anniversary, he revealed that Creative Business Unit 3, as it was called at the time, did work collectively to reduce the cost of operating FF11 by using virtual servers and even billing some of its costs to Final Fantasy XIV. It was also clear from that interview that reducing costs and preventing deficit was a core value that Yoshi P enforced on his team. I believe that a similar approach might have also been taken to reduce or share the costs of development of assets for an FF11 remake. The biggest potential indication of this is the extensive use of FF11 enemy models in Final Fantasy XIV. As an FF11 player who also plays 14, I have lost count of how many FF11 monsters being ported directly into that game there are. But it might be safe to say more than half of all the unique models in FF11 have already appeared, even down to the way the models are rigged, except that they have improved textures. While it is true that this could simply be to reduce costs for FF14 alone, it is puzzling when we consider that only a handful of enemies from FF13, and virtually no enemies from FF15 have ever been used, and the asset quality for those are much higher to begin with. The number of reused FF11 assets is simply disproportionately high. I believe this might be one way in which Yoshi P would have been able to bill work to FF14, where the assets being ported could also be used for an FF11 remake. Additionally, I think that Yoshi P and Creative Studio 3 are being very strategic with the way that they have incorporated elements of both FF9 and FF11 in the upcoming Dawn Trail expansion for FF14. With the massive following that FF14 has, making references to FF9 and FF11 would be the perfect way to generate hype and promote the potential remakes for both games. Ever since the FF11 themed Alliance raid was announced, there have already been numerous FF14 players jumping over to vana'diel to try it out, as well as content creators covering FF11 when they previously wouldn't have. This is free promotion for both games, and would undoubtedly have a positive effect on the sales and subscriptions of such games should they release. That being said, the Alliance raid will only release in patch 7.1 and will likely conclude only in 7.5. If the release of a remake is timed around this, it would mean that it could still be 2 years away. As a final point, I also personally feel that Creative Studio 3 owes a lot to Final Fantasy XI and has a duty to preserve its legacy. Keeping original FF11 up and running indefinitely does not seem like it is enough, because it is still relatively inaccessible to new players or people who wish to experience it on a modern generation console. It is likely that FF11 was also the game that essentially bankrolled a realm reborn, seeing as it was the most profitable Final Fantasy at the time. Without the help of FF14's MMO Senpai, as Yoshi P calls it, it could never have reached the heights that it has now. Truly, FF11 walked so that FF14 could run, but remains as the least played and most underappreciated mainline Final Fantasy game in the series. If Creative Studio 3 could give FF11 a chance to shine today, I believe they would take that opportunity, because FF11 deserves so much more recognition than it currently receives. I just hope that I am right. What do you think? Do you want a remake of Final Fantasy XI? And do you think it will happen? Or is all of this wishful thinking on my part? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.